prevention is better than cure. If you don't want to develop tooth decay, you have to brush your teeth regularly. If you don't want to develop lung damage, you have to cut back on cigarettes. If you don't want to develop a vitamin deficiency, you have to eat some fruit and vegetables. Everybody already knows at least the basics of keeping themselves in good physical health, even if we don't all choose to apply that knowledge every day. But what about keeping ourselves in good mental health? Major depression, generalized anxiety, anorexia nervosa. What do you have to do to prevent these conditions? Whilst growing up, I hadn't even considered the possibility that I could take preventative action against a mental health disorder. I just assumed that if somebody ended up with a disorder, it was simply bad luck. Fortunately, however, multiple studies have shown that people who are exposed to preventative and early intervention strategies are less likely to develop certain mental health disorders in the future, suggesting my assumption wasn't fully accurate. While it is true that many of the factors which could give someone a predisposition towards developing a certain disorder are beyond their control, such as their genetics or growing up in a stressful environment, there are also a number of factors that they can influence, and if these factors are addressed, the likelihood of succumbing to that disorder is significantly reduced. This is a message that I wish everyone could hear. If people are not made aware of how certain actions could lead to poor mental health outcomes, then they will not be in a position where they can choose to avoid those actions. To put it more simply, people who are not taught how to manage their mental health will naturally be more vulnerable to developing mental health conditions than those who are. As such, a basic understanding of how these disorders can develop and what one must do to defend against the onset of these disorders should be just as much common knowledge as the 3 statements just made about brushing your teeth, cutting back on cigarettes, and eating fruit and vegetables. This understanding is particularly necessary for depression, as it has been listed by the World Health Organization as the leading cause of ill health and disability worldwide, and a problem of that magnitude will never be solved while focusing on cure alone. Perhaps if everybody was preemptively armed with simple strategies to recognize and manage the symptoms, depression might not be so common. Even if your life is going great and you don't expect to slide into depression in the future, life can be unpredictable sometimes, so it's still better to know how to manage your own mental health as a precaution anyway, just in case your circumstances happen to change. So because everyone, regardless of how happy or unhappy they currently are, has the potential to gain some benefit from this information, I wanted to provide a brief overview of what everyone should know about depression. So first of all, defining depression as a chemical imbalance or as prolonged sadness is a gross oversimplification. Depression is an interaction of psychological, biological, behavioral, and environmental processes which result in consistently low moods and an impairment in daily functioning. To understand how the interaction of these processes could lead to depression, it might be useful to consider this simplified model, which shows how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can reciprocally interact with each other. Perhaps someone thinks that they are unattractive, so they get upset and they end up binging on TV and junk food to help themselves feel better. Or perhaps a person doesn't submit an assignment on time, so they ridicule themselves, which makes them feel awful. Notice in these examples that the first and the last step in this chain reaction are also connected. This can lead to a feedback loop, where negative thoughts lead to negative feelings and to negative behaviors, which leads to more negative thoughts and negative feelings and negative behaviors, which in turn leads to even more negative thoughts, and so on. This is sometimes referred to as the downward spiral. If this pattern continues on and the negative thoughts and negative behaviors become more entrenched and ingrained, this will probably lead to clinical depression. Remember that in real life the interactions are more complex than this. I'm just simplifying the pattern to help get the point across. Arguably, the most effective single treatment for depression is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short, which essentially involves filtering out negative or unhealthy thoughts and behaviors and replacing them with positive or healthy thoughts and behaviors. This can interrupt and even reverse the downward spiral, helping to alleviate the symptoms of depression. Obviously, it would be in anybody's best interest to use CBT to dismantle the downward spiral as early as possible, preferably well before they even begin sliding into depression. Unfortunately, however, many people will not be taught how to apply CBT techniques unless they've already developed a mental health disorder and sought therapy. This is an issue which really ought to be addressed on a much larger scale, but for now, here's a crash course in some core CBT concepts. Imagine 2 people. They're both waiting for a friend to show up and watch a movie with them, but this friend doesn't show up. One of them thinks their friend doesn't like them enough to show up and gets really upset. The other person thinks that the friend probably had a reasonable excuse and happily decides to go and enjoy the movie anyway. In this scenario, the same event elicited different emotional responses in different people. This is a demonstration of how it is not what happens to us, but our interpretation of what happens to us that influences how we feel. As such, we should play an active role in how we see the world rather than a passive one. By evaluating the truthfulness of the beliefs which mediate your view of the world and choosing to take a more optimistic interpretation of everything, you will not only feel better, but you will have an advantage in life, for you will see opportunities where others see only obstacles. Mindfulness exercises can complement this process by improving our ability to notice these beliefs and interpretations. Mindfulness is the practice of observing thoughts and sensations as they come and go without projecting judgment or appraisal onto them, and multiple studies have found that this skill can help reduce the symptoms of depression. There are a great number of other behaviors which also have a positive impact on mood. For example, improving one's physical health through diet and exercise tends to improve one's mental health in turn, and making the right changes to your physical and social environment can help to ensure that you are only surrounded by positive influences and supportive relationships. By acting intentionally and deliberately, anybody is able to steer their life into a more pleasant direction. With this said, common symptoms of depression are fatigue, low mood, and a lack of pleasure in activities. And so even if a depressed person understands that it's healthier to spend less time ruminating in bed and eating junk food, and spend more time socializing with friends and getting some exercise, they may still find themselves lacking the motivation to actually execute on those things. The key to resolving this tension is not biting off more than they can chew, even if that means only biting off a single crumb at a time. By giving themselves permission to start small, they can minimize sources of discouragement, such as failing to reach a goal or feeling overwhelmed, and therefore build the momentum needed to take on larger tasks when they are ready. This method of slowly building momentum can be thought of as constructing an upward spiral. For example, if you start by doing something that requires very little motivation that makes you feel less fatigued, then you can use that extra energy to solve a problem that has been hanging over your head, which in turn could give you the free time to go do something that would make you a bit happier, and then you can ride that happiness into a positive social environment to boost your mood even further, and so on. This pattern can of course be continued well after pulling oneself out of depression to provide a touch of extra happiness even in the absence of a disorder. The main takeaway message from this video is that it is extremely worthwhile learning how to better manage your mental health while things are going well, so that you know how to course correct if things start to go bad. Do not allow the early stages of a downward spiral to gain momentum. Make the conscious effort to filter out unhealthy thoughts, behaviors, and environmental influences as soon as they arise, and replace them with healthy thoughts, behaviors, and environmental influences. Remember that even if you only take a single step in the right direction, you're still better off than before you took that step. A quick disclaimer. The information in this video is in no way comprehensive enough to actually replace undergoing therapy with a qualified therapist. So if you are already suffering from depression, then I encourage you to seek help. Research has shown that people who do engage in therapy have better outcomes than those who don't, so whatever excuse you have for not seeking help when you need it is not doing you any favors, it's holding you back. Depressed individuals definitely face challenges, but they are also capable of making a full recovery.